We are here today with Jonathan Simkin, and Jonathan Simkin has had a wild ride of a career. Starting as a criminal and refugee lawyer, Jonathan accidentally fell into the music business in the early 1990s. Not realizing he had a talent for finding talent, Jonathan discovered and secured recording agreements for many artists who went on to huge success, including Nickelback, Len, Steal My Sunshine, and Default. Jonathan has been intimately involved in guiding the career of Nickelback, the biggest selling recording artist of the last 20 years. In 2001, Jonathan and Nickelback singer Chad Kroeger started 604 Records, which has grown into one of the biggest Canadian independent labels and is internationally known for its many hits, including one of the biggest selling digital singles of all time, Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen. Other 604 artists include Marianas Trench, Coleman Hell.
Boo! Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I know. Dallas Smith, Dirty Radio, and Theory of a Dead Man. Jonathan also runs Simkin Artist Management, which manages the careers of many of the bands on 604, as well as other artists. In 2014, Simkin built a new headquarters for 604 in the Railtown district of Vancouver, and those headquarters incorporate professional recording studios and a soundstage. In 2017, Simkin started Comedy Here Often, a comedy record label which includes comedians such as Yumi Nagashima and Charlie Demers. More recently, Comedy Here Often launched the Comedy Here Often podcast network, which has some nice early successes with a number of charting podcasts. In 2021, Simkin started the fourth record label under the 604 brand. Intraset is an ambient label that's already had success in the playlisting world through a series of compilations. In addition to his work in music, Simkin also guides the visual art careers of some of the top visual graphic artists in the world, including Mad Dog Jones, Fuckrender, and Victor Mosquera. So what kind of things fall into the responsibility bucket for an artist versus a label versus management? And really specifically, what are the kinds of things you see artists get proactive about that result in their best chances for success in the business?
Yeah. So it's funny, the line between what a manager does versus what a label does is kind of blurry sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays when so many more managers are also the label. Like that's become much more common. Like when I first started, that was very rare. That was very rare. And I think it was really a function of Napster and the fact that the business really was in the shitter for a while. And so for example, I started my management company mostly because of that. Like there was that horrible period of time when Napster happens and then all of a sudden CD sales just fucking plummet. And but that was before streaming, so you didn't have streaming picking up the slack. And that's when I started the management company. Like I sort of had a choice at that point. Like I remember calling Chad right around that time and kind of went, man, like we got a problem. And he's like, what? And I said, well, we're a record company and nobody buys records anymore. Like, and he's like, well, do you think we should be doing those 360 deals? And that, for those who don't know, that's one of those deals where, like, traditionally record labels only made money one way, from the sale of the master recordings from records. But when the business went down the toilet, they started doing these things called 360 deals, where in addition to the record revenue, they took a piece of your publishing, they took a piece of your merchandise, they took a piece of your live shows. And you know what? I had no interest in that.
Yeah.
Because as much as I love making money in the music business, and I do, I also love sleeping at night. And just the thought of having all our artists hate our guts, because of that, I couldn't stomach it. I couldn't live with it. I just, and again, it's not me being a nice guy. It's me going, I don't think I can run a business where everybody hates my guts because of what our deals look like. And so instead I started a management company, because to me, it's like, okay, I can at least pick up the slack there. At least I'm giving something back. I'm not just taking percentages because, hey man, we need to, it's not fair that, we're making the record and we don't make any money. Like, yeah, I get that, but it's like, I didn't feel right to me. I wanted to only participate in those other revenues if I was actually contributing to those revenues increasing. And
Right.
so that was my personal answer to that. And it's funny because, and it sort of goes back to your question, I must say 10 times a day, well, wearing my hat as the label guy, but wearing my hat as the manager, because I can definitely see the difference. And because I'm so conscious of and nervous about the conflict of interest, it was important to me to always be careful about that. And to me, the way to be careful about that was to articulate it. I'm constantly articulating that. And that's a tough line to walk. Oh my God. Especially when it's like an artist saying, well, if you weren't our manager, I'm sure the label would be spending way more money. And I always got to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
I try my best to take a step back and kind of go, is he right? Is she right? Is what she's saying correct? And, sometimes I'll be like, well, maybe it is right. Maybe I should revisit this. But, I'm happy to say 9 times out of 10, I'm like, no, if that was a manager coming to me and saying, I got to spend the money on this, I'd be like, no, like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But the thing that's nice about being management and label is there are times when, like, let's say a band wants to tour Europe. And if it wasn't for the fact that we had the safety net of that revenue that comes in from the management side on that band, I might not be willing to risk the money. I might say, you know what, it's too risky. I'm sorry. But because I know I've got the safety net, I'm like, you know what? Sure, let's do Europe.
Yeah.
Because even if it's a disaster and I spend $25,000 and it doesn't really move the ball down the field, hey, at least we're still doing well in Canada, and I'm going to get some percentages off of SOCAN and off of the shows. And, so it's kind of in that way worked out. It's tough though. And I will say that now that the record business is healthier again, we take on much less management stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in that whole matrix, what are the things that the artist can do to be proactive to have the best chances of contributing to their own success? Because it's all those pieces, right, that contribute. It's the label, it's the management, and it's the artist. If the artist isn't carrying their load, none of this is working.
I think, again, there's so many tools that can be right in the hands of artists these days, especially if you're in a position where you can record your own music and you don't have to worry about spending money on going to a studio and all that. So number one, you put the means of production into your own hands. And if you have that capacity, then it really puts you ahead in the game. It really gives you a leg up in how you do stuff. And then if you become savvy at social media and savvy at your own marketing, again, that you can do so much more good for yourself that way than by sending out, endless numbers of emails to record labels saying, please sign me. I think that falls on deaf ears a lot these days, unless, you're not just saying, please sign me because I have great music. You're saying, please sign me, I have great music. Plus, we've got X number of followers here, and our Spotify is really growing. And, 6 months ago, we only had this number of followers, and now we have this number of followers, and it feels like something's happening. And if you can, it's a business like any business, and it's no different than if you were starting a clothing company or a pizza restaurant. It's about making great product, and it's about getting the word out that you're making great product. Just because it's a music business doesn't make that any different. And again, because of the fact that the business has changed so much, I hate to say it because it's kind of sad, but having great music, unfortunately, isn't necessarily enough anymore.
Yeah, it is sad, but true.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's been that way for a while, frankly.
Agreed.
I think as soon as it became a really visual medium, having great music was never enough after that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. It's very interesting.
Yeah. What do you think helps an artist experience success specifically in a touring environment? Like how should they manage expectations and what do they really need to bring to the table to have a successful touring situation?
You know, COVID has changed that so much
Yeah.
that the answer I would have given 3 years ago is almost. And it's funny, before I was on this Zoom today, I had an agent in from Toronto, in fact, from the company that books your brother's band. And
Yeah.
we were sitting and having a conversation, and both kind of lamenting the fact that it's become so hard right now. It's become so hard for bands to tour, and it really sucks because that was, that was the one area where you really didn't need necessarily to rely on anybody else. We have a band on 604 called the Gins, and we've tried a bit with radio with them, haven't had a ton of success, a little bit. But you go on and look at their Spotify, and I mean, they have millions and millions and millions of streams. And a lot of that has just been from them hitting the road. They're one of those bands that's like, hey, if nobody else is going to do it for us, we're going to do it ourselves. So they'll book their
Yeah.
own US tour and just go out and do it. And you know what? That's the story of Nickelback. I mean,
Yeah.
Nickelback wandered in the desert by themselves for years before anybody gave a shit other than
Yeah.
me. Like, I am in my 28th year with them. When they first approached me, they were, Chad was a teenager, I think he was 19. And, that first 3 or 4 years before they got signed, they were the most self-sufficient band I've ever seen. And that's why, if people don't like their music, I don't care. Like, music's subjective.
Yeah.
I have no problem if somebody says to me, I just don't like their music. Okay, great. But that's why all those sort of venomous attacks on them really rub me the wrong way, because it's like corporate bullshit, sellout rock. It's like, you know what? If you knew anything about what you were talking about, you'd know that this was the most DIY band
Yeah.
I ever worked with. Nobody gave a shit about them, so they were like, okay, I guess we're going to have to do this ourselves.
I just did an interview with Danny Craig, and he was talking about how Chad had quit his job and basically became the
The
band's
promo guy,
radio tracker.
100%. He would come to my office, and hey man, can I come to your office and work the phones this afternoon? Yeah. So he'd come, and like he even had a fake name. I can't remember what it was. Like, hey, it's Spike Wilson from Vancouver Indie Promo. Just want to make sure you got that Nickelback CD. Ryan Peake, the guitar player, would book the shows because they
Yeah.
didn't have an agent. That's before Ralph got involved. Mike Kruger, Chad's brother, bass player, Mike would was in charge of distribution. So what did that mean? It means he would get on a plane, fly out to Toronto, pick up the CDs at Cinram, rent a truck, and drive around to every store in Ontario with a copy of the chart saying, hey, we're number 18 this week. Do you think you could take a few CDs? My God, like talk about a DIY band.
Yeah.
They did it all themselves. And, if anybody wants a lesson in how do you get from A to B, there's your lesson. Assume nobody's going to help you. Assume that you have to do it yourself. That forces you to be self-reliant. And that's also been part of the story of 604. Like right from day one, like for sure the first 2 years that we existed, I made it a point to, and the only record we ever released for the first 2 years was that first Theory of a Dead Man record. And part of the reason we did that was, I remember, having a conversation with Chad more than once, was like, I want to learn. Let's let Universal do everything because I want to watch and learn and see how they're doing it. And then on the next record, you know what? Maybe we're not going to need them as much because I think we had to pay them for the various services they were doing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, if we can figure out marketing on our own, we don't need to pay 5% to Universal. So I can't overstate the importance of being self-reliant. And it doesn't mean you have to build a huge business. You just have to build a start. You just have to build the beginning of a huge business. You get a core number of fans. Like, again, going back to Marianas, like I remember like Ian Castleman was working MySpace like a motherfucker. Like,
Oh
he would
yeah.
be spending endless hours on MySpace, and which was before other bands figured that stuff out. Like,
They would I mean, I think ultimately Ian kind of took it over, but at first they would take shifts and everybody had to do their shift of like, okay, today it's your day doing 2 hours on
I
MySpace. Tomorrow
remember,
it's my day doing 2 hours on
I
MySpace.
remember.
Yep.
Well, I've always said that Marianas changed our label forever, and I mean that was, there were a few things about that first album that changed the label forever. We were so cocksure about them in terms of the radio, and as you will probably remember, we didn't get any radio on the first record.
Yeah.
The pop stations thought it was too rock, the rock stations thought it was too pop. Everybody
Yeah.
always thinks Shake Tramp was a hit. It wasn't. It was a video hit. There's a big difference between a video hit and a radio hit. And it was very disconcerting and it was very upsetting. And I believed in the band so much. And I remember we had sort of like an emergency meeting at the office and kind of went, well, shit, radio's not working. What are we going to do? And we were like, okay, well, hold on. Let's calm down and take a step back. What is working? Okay, well, when they play shows, it works.
Mm-hmm.
When they play shows, we get fans. Okay, so the shows work. What else is working? Well, these video clips that we're putting up, and I'm not talking music videos. They used to put up those goofy clips,
Yeah.
and so we ended up coming up with a plan. We bought them a video camera, and we sent it to Toronto for 4 months.
Yep.
We rented them or no, I think Mike Ailey's parents had a condo. We were able
it was
to figure out a living arrangement, and basically said, stay there for 3 months, get to know other bands, tour around as much as you can, play as many shows as possible, and here's a video camera, by the way, film yourself. And there were a couple of turning points on that album cycle. One of them was the Hot Chocolate clip, which
in
that's
Subway.
where Josh went to a Subway dressed as a ninja. To this day, I don't know what the ninja thing had to do with anything, but
he was wearing my sweater.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
The whole thing is ridiculous. And for those who don't know, and it's still up online, so you can go see it, but it's Josh basically stomping around the Subway going, hot chocolate. It made no sense, but it was kind of a fan challenge. It was like, okay, let's see what fans can do it. And so they were in Ontario, I think, at the time, and they came back. And the first show they played in Vancouver when they came back was at the Purple Onion, the long gone Purple Onion in Gastown.
Long gone.
And I went and showed up, and I'll be damned, there was a lineup out the door. And I walked in that club, and what's the first thing I saw? Fans holding signs saying hot chocolate. And it was a profound moment. It was an epiphany.
Yeah.
Because for the first time, I saw an actual tangible link between the internet and the real world.
Yep.
It was like, okay, isn't this interesting? Because before that, the internet was not very trusted, and it still isn't, but for different reasons. Like at that time, it was like, it was more easy to manipulate. And, I remember getting these emails from bands saying, dear Mr. Simkin, we're a band, blah, 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 and we have 4 million followers on MySpace. And you go to MySpace, and it's like, wow, I'll be damned. They do have 4 million followers. Then you listen to the music and go, oh God, the music's horrible. There was no real link between.
Yeah.
I just didn't trust the internet. That was the first time we kind of went, wow, you can actually do something online that tangibly leads to somebody spending money on a ticket.
Yeah.
Number two was iTunes, because when you have a direct deal with iTunes like we do, you can access the back end of iTunes. It's called iTunes Connect, and it's amazing because it gives you a real-time view of, and this was before streaming, it was really the download store. It gave you a real-time view of what you sold, where you sold it, how much you sold it for. And I remember going on there one day and going, hold on, how in God's name did we sell a bunch of records in Scandinavia? We've never been there. We're not spending any money there. What the fuck? And then you sort of go, and it's both simple and profound. Fucking internet.
Yep.
Those videos, those music videos that were getting, millions of views, is international by nature.
Yeah.
And our company was never the same after that first Marianas album cycle. Because instead of doing it the old school way of, you make an album, you pick a single, you spend way too much money on a video, you throw it out into the world, and you cross your fingers. Did it work? Oh, it didn't work. On to the next one. We never did that again. After that first album cycle, it was like, different set of questions. Who's the audience?
Mm-hmm.
How do we reach the audience? What are the tools we can use to get this band to that audience? That's a very different discussion than just let's make an album.
Yeah.
And to this day, that's why I give Marianas so much credit for the success of 604, because it was that first album cycle and the way that we did it that really, really changed how we marketed all the bands going forward.
Yep. Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty cool story, that insight and it just changing the forward motion there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's take a little bit of a left turn.
Okay.
Let's talk about you want to explain the different ways an artist can earn income from their talents? I think everybody jumps to like record a record, release a hit song, get plays, tour, voila, I'm a star. That road isn't really that straight for most people. You want to talk a little bit about radio plays versus streaming, how merch works, licensing your music out, all the other streams of income, and what kind of earnings percentages an artist retains versus sharing with those involved in those processes. I think it's an area where a lot of young artists don't really have any idea even what questions to ask.
So, if you're an independent artist, what are the main revenue streams just for any artist? There's record sales. So that's revenue that comes from mostly these days from streaming, or, if you make vinyl or CDs and sell them off the stage. But as far as, streaming goes, I know lots of people like to bitch about, we make no money off of Spotify and we make no money off of Apple. And I guess that's a little bit true, but the truth is, that's more a function of whether or not anybody likes your music. I mean, if you put something up and people like it, there's money to be made. I know it because we're an independent label, and I know that there's money to be made. We have an artist called Coleman Hell who had a very big hit, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, called Two Heads, and I think it went to number 3 on the U.S. chart. And we put it out independently, and it's just one of those songs that reacted. And before you knew it, we had like 16 million streams.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the phone started to ring. But before we actually did the deal, we probably got it up to 20-25 million streams, and that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like, people think there's no money. There is money, but there's only money if people give a shit and click on your music. In some ways, it's no different than it was before. If people weren't interested in your music, they didn't buy your CD.
Yep.
Like, it's not like most CDs sold. Most CDs didn't sell. Most music doesn't sell. Most music is a failure from a financial point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But streaming, basically, if you're independent, you usually have to go through a company like CD Baby or one of those aggregators. So they take a percent. And I think that's usually 10 or 15%. I'm not sure, but it's something around there. And of course, Apple takes and Spotify take their chunk. And that's a big chunk. I think they usually take, these numbers are going to be slightly off because to be honest, I'm not the accountant here. I'm not the money guy.
That's okay. Just sort of general terms is fine.
So maybe 25-30% is going to go to the platform. Maybe another 10-15% going to go to the aggregator. So a big chunk's coming off the top right away, which is unfortunate, but what are you going to do? And so that's basically streaming. The good news is if you go through an aggregator, they can pretty much get your music on all the platforms. The big 3 or 4, which are YouTube Music, Amazon, Apple, and Spotify. But then they can often get you on those smaller ones too that also do well. Deezer and I can't think of them all, but there's a lot of them. So there's that. If you're touring, that's harder to make money, but a lot of times a tour is really nothing more than a loss leader to sell the records and to sell merch and to sell CDs. So if you're touring, you're smart to have vinyl, you're smart to have merch, you're smart to have CDs. The economics on that are pretty straightforward. It costs almost nothing to make CDs now.
Mhm.
Buck a unit, I don't know, less. Vinyl's more expensive. That can run you, I think at least 10 to 12 bucks a unit. But if you're selling it for 20 bucks at a show, there's still a profit to be made. Making t-shirts and making merch, that can make you money. Making sure that you're making it available in all respects. So if you got a website, make sure you're selling it off your website. Start a
Yeah.
Shopify. Do something that's going to enable you to actually have an online e-commerce type business. There's definitely revenue to be made there. If you're lucky enough to get radio play, there's public performance money. If you're lucky enough to get your songs played on satellite radio, there's sound exchange money, which is the public performance that comes from satellite radio. YouTube, if you were lucky enough to get a YouTube video that goes viral, there's money to be made on YouTube. So I sometimes say that it's a business of pennies now, which it kind of is. But there's a lot of pennies out there. If you know how to collect them and to make sure you're collecting them all, then you can actually still do quite well. So I think it's about being aware of all those revenue streams and making sure you're doing everything in your power to collect on those revenue streams. And again, have your expectations set properly. Nobody's going to make a killing at the beginning. They just aren't. That's just not going to happen. You got to build it. You got to build it smartly. You got to be willing to be broke for the first few years. And if you believe in yourself and work your ass off, hopefully you start to see some return on it sooner than later. And again, it might not be a huge return, but as long as it's going in the right direction and you're building in the right direction, then you're good. You're happy. You're hopefully leading to something much bigger. I mean, I sometimes get people asking me in interviews or bands asking, like, what's your definition of success? And honestly, it's being able to pay your rent.
Yeah.
If you can make a living, now, if you can do better than that, great. But hey, if you're doing something you love and you're actually eating and have a roof over your head, you're far ahead of most people.
Yeah. 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 Isn't that the truth? If you don't have to drive Uber on the side, if you get to pay your bills by doing what you love, that absolutely is the definition of success.
Yeah.
So let's talk about streaming music for a minute. You've made references to it, and you did talk about, going through an aggregate. But what do artists need to know about that? It is a totally different landscape than terrestrial radio. You used to hire a radio tracker to submit and track spins on terrestrial radio. Streaming doesn't really work that way. Is there any special magic to like getting added to playlists or streaming stations, and or is it just luck of the draw? Or
it's kind of all the above. Like I think it's hard, there's no doubt about it. Like unless you have a relationship, like we're lucky. One of the things that was a real advantage to us retaining our own digital rights is that it kind of forced us to understand digital probably in ways that it didn't for other labels who just hand it all over to their distributor, because it really forced us to forge our own relationships with the streaming services and to understand how to market it. But that's harder for a band starting out because they don't have the phone number of the guy who runs Spotify Canada. They're not able to just pick up the phone and say, dude, help me out with it. Like they don't have that. There is secondary playlisting. That's something that definitely helps. And there are companies you can hire. And secondary playlisting are all those playlists that aren't officially the Apple or Spotify playlists. They're ones that are just put up by whoever. And, excuse me, we have people at this company who spend a lot of time working secondary playlisters. They'll contact them and say, hey, we've got this new music, because it's really about just building your numbers. And the more Spotify playlists or the more Apple playlists or Amazon playlists you get on, the more people hear it. And the more people hear it, if they like it, the more they stream it. And the more they stream it, the more people notice. And the more people notice, the more that the streaming services notice. Again, making it sound easy. It's not. But it's a process. It's definitely a process. I'd say be careful about those companies because there are some legit ones, but there's also a lot of really shady people out there taking advantage of artists who are just looking to build their stream numbers and making promises they can't keep. and there's some real bad actors in this business,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So you got to really be careful. And if somebody's telling you, oh yeah, it's going to be a no-brainer, go the other way, because
Yeah.
that's bullshit.
If it
Nothing's a
sounds too
no-brainer.
good to be true, it's too good to be
It's
true.
too good to be true, and nothing's a no-brainer in this business. Nothing's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to be prepared to work it yourself. And I mean, as far as the secondary playlisting goes, that's as easy as sort of looking around on these streaming services at these secondary playlists, because most of them have clues. It's like, oh, because like, for example, there's certain magazines or blogs that have their own playlists. So at least
Mhm.
then you can go to the blog and say, hey, I've got this new song and da 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 da. Do you think there's any way you can help me out? Put it on your and you know what? You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
People are often willing, if they like it, if it's quality, people are often willing to say, yeah, you know what, I will give you a shot.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So yeah, establishing those relationships matters. Yeah.
100%, 100%, and building it brick by brick by brick by brick.
Yeah. So I'd like to draw on your expertise as an entertainment lawyer for a hot second. Knowing that emerging artists often don't have a lot of extra cash, can you talk for a minute about when is it really, really important to spend the money and hire an entertainment lawyer? It's a pretty specialized field. And
Yeah.
I know that if you're offered a contract and you're not a lawyer yourself, then you really should be hiring someone to look over it who is pure and simply on your side, right?
Yeah, I don't think people need. I mean, again, the business has changed. Like back when I first started, I often had people hire me long before they had a contract. Why? Because certain lawyers were considered trusted sources for shopping music. So I
Mhm.
often had people hire me to shop their music. That's very different than hiring me to look over a contract or sue someone or, things like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, why is it's weird. I've got my messages off, but yet they keep, anyways, okay, sorry.
All
So,
good.
you know, when does somebody really need an entertainment lawyer these days? When you have a contract.
Yeah.
There's really no need for a lawyer before that. Um, that's just my opinion, but I think, like, somebody gives you a contract, don't screw around. Don't try and be a hero by doing it yourself.
Yeah.
Don't go to your dad's friend who's a real estate lawyer, who's going to give you some quick advice. That's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
When you have a real contract that's going to have ramifications for your intellectual property, for your career, you don't screw around. Get a lawyer.
Yep. Yeah. Um, I yeah, and I think that that is a place where young up and coming artists sometimes don't realize how important that piece really is.
I once in a while I'll make an offer to somebody, like a record contract offer, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm not going to get a lawyer. I'm just going to look it over with my dad." We will actually pay for them to get a lawyer,
Wow.
because it's that important that they get proper advice.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
want, and that's partly self-interest. That's partly me not wanting an artist to come back and say, "Hey, that was unfair. We didn't have a lawyer."
Yeah.
It's too important. I don't want that to ever happen. Not just because I'm scared that they're going to try and get out of the deal, but also it's like, just get a lawyer. Like, just have somebody give it a proper look over.
Yeah.
Um, and it's in your interest. Like, just do it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like I said, like, that's really the moment in time. Somebody makes you an offer on something, and if you get a piece of paper, and then unless it is the most simple, straightforward piece of paper that isn't going to have a huge amount of like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know, like, somebody comes to you and says, "We want to put your song on a blog, and we're just going to put it on I don't know, a playlist." Okay, do you have to hire a lawyer for that? Maybe not. I mean, if it's a simple, straightforward piece of paper, there isn't any long-term ramifications.
Mhm.
But I mean, just going back to what we were talking about earlier, which is like these aggregator system services like CD Baby, and what's another one? TuneCore. Some of those contracts are tricky.
Yep.
And I've had people who accidentally check off boxes they didn't mean to check off. and all of
Hmm.
a sudden realize, oh my God, I've just given my publishing rights over to this company. That's the exact reason why you want to have a lawyer look at these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so we hear a fair bit about established artists having like teams, right? As an emerging artist, what is the team that's important to build? And when and how does that need to expand over time?
It's same sort of thing. Like it tends to just sort of, you kind of, this sounds stupid, but like you kind of know it when you know it. Like you
Yeah.
sort of, when, if things start to, like to the degree you can handle it between amongst the band, like we were talking earlier about the Marianas guys taking turns on MySpace and stuff.
Mhm.
Like that's a beautiful way to do it. Like if you've got a band who's a real team and they're all willing to pull their weight and do their job, then you know what? You'll know when you need someone. And usually when you need someone is when things start to grow to a point where it's like, oh God, we can't handle this anymore. There's too
Yeah.
many requests coming in. We don't really have time to both make a record and maintain our social media. That's when because the one thing you don't want to do is screw that up. Like if things are starting to happen and you're too busy, that's when you have to either go, maybe we need a manager, or maybe we need somebody, maybe we need to contract somebody to do our social media.
Hmm.
Because the one thing you don't want is to lose your momentum or blow it by not, you know, by not having the proper amount of people on the team to sort of do all that. Like, it's funny, again, back to the Marianas example, but I remember early on, I had to twist the guy's arms to hire a tour manager because they were so used to doing it on their own. And they were
Hmm.
like, we don't want to spend that money. And I'm like, trust me, you're going to be so. And they never, of course, once they did it, they're like, yeah, okay, you're right. That
Yeah.
was because now we can focus on the show. We can focus on meeting the fans. We don't
Yeah.
have to be like, oh my God, how are we going to load all that gear in? Or how are we going to set it up? Or how are we going to, that's stuff that, like, listen, it's a luxury to be in a position where you can hire people to do that.
Yeah.
You're lucky if you're in that position. But as soon as you're in that position, don't fight it.
Yeah.
That's part of what growing a business is about. It's no different than what I've done with 604. There's a reason we now have something like shocking, like 40, I think we have 44 or 45 employees, which
Yeah.
blows my mind. And I don't mean that in some with false modesty. It freaks me out. But the
Yeah.
reason we have that many employees is every time something succeeds or grows, um, you got to, if you don't hire someone, the one thing you don't want is to have your artist saying, you know what, we don't feel like we're being properly serviced. Like
Yeah.
that's like, to me, that's like a shot in the heart.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I always want to make sure that, if we have some success, so like, the comedy label, when we started to have some real success, I hired a bunch of people. Like it was
Yeah.
basically one person. Now it's 5 people.
Yeah.
The NFT division that we have, when we started to have some big success with that, um, well, I had to hire 2 people
Yeah.
because if I hadn't, it would have imploded because I couldn't do it all by myself.
Yeah.
So it's important. I mean, if you get to a position where you need somebody, you're lucky, but don't be stupid about it and don't try to save money by not doing the hire because you're just shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that's important for the next generation of artists to know before they're sort of entering the fray?
There's nothing more important than the songs you write. That is absolutely the most important thing. And when you lose sight of that, you kind of are lost. Everything else is secondary. Um, you know, um, you should be writing every day. You should be trying your best to produce something every single day. That's what you are. If you're an artist, you're somebody who creates art. So create art.
Mm.
Do it on a daily basis. If some days nothing comes out, okay, nothing came out. But you still got to keep at it on a literally almost daily basis. If you don't keep at it on a daily basis, you're never going to get anywhere. You really, really, that is so important to not lose sight of that. It's all about the song. It's all about the performance. It's all about the art. And when people take their eye off of that, it's all often sort of the beginning of the end. So to me, that's always my best piece of advice. Write and write and write and write, and then write some more. Um, that's kind of my best advice to any artist, really.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jonathan. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, of course.
Where can people find you? Web, social media, all
What if
that
I
sort
don't
of
want to be
stuff?
found? What if I don't want to be found?
I know that much about you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a bit of a loner that way, but no, it's easy to find us. www.604records.com, that's the website. And then if you scroll down to the bottom of the website, all the other Comedy Here Often, Light Organ, the studio, we have a studio business, all that stuff can be found at the bottom of the webpage. I'm on Twitter. It's the only social media I do. It's gotten me into much trouble over the years, but nonetheless, it is where I am most active
Mouthy.
and mouthy. So that's just my name. I think it's just at Jonathan Simkin. And since it's out there anyway, Jonathan Simkin at 604records.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. I appreciate all your wisdom and sharing it with us.
Well, let me plug you too. Anybody out there looking for a vocal coach, this is who you want to be working with. In the proud tradition of your mother, Corlin, Sarah's the best. I send people to her all the time, and there's a reason for that, because she's the best at what she does. So don't you need some help on that side of your career. Sarah's a great person to do that for you.
Thank you. I so appreciate that.
Well, I'm saying it because it's the
Thank you.
truth. Okay, thanks, Sarah. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jonathan.